House Leader, third party.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill 46, the Housing Statutes Development Financing Amendment Act. This is one of 5 pieces of legislation that are currently in the mix here in this fall 2023 session that have to do with changing housing policy in this province. As I spoke to earlier this week, Bill 44, which was the second directly housing-related bill. The first one was supported by our caucus, finally regulations on short-term vacation rentals. Definitely a long time in coming. Bill 44 is about substantively changing the zoning laws, and I spoke at great length, possibly the greatest length that I've spoken to any bill on that, sharing my experience first as a municipal councillor who had to deal with the impacts of decisions that were made in this chamber on the well-being of our communities, on the ability of local government officials to be able to support the people that live in our communities, to be able to generate enough revenue, to be able to maintain and upkeep infrastructure and other services that are much needed in the community. It's been no secret that this province has not provided local governments the financing mechanisms that they need, the funding mechanisms that they need to be able to capture an appropriate amount of revenue to be able to keep the infrastructure up to date. I remember when I first got elected in Central Saanich, I sat down with the finance director talking about the strategy that was required by the provincial government at the time to start to account, an accounting practice of all of the bits and pieces that make our communities work, all the things that nobody thinks about. The fire hydrants, for an example, have a price that you have to pay in order to have a fire hydrant. And from the moment that that's installed, and that's the piece of infrastructure that's above the ground that everybody can see, and there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that's below it that people can't see, and then that infrastructure's attached to high pressure pipes that are maintained by a different level of government, a different type of government. They have to maintain those, and then if you follow that back to the reservoir, there has to be a sufficient amount of capacity in the reservoir to have the type of water that's needed in order to be able to suppress fires in our province. And all of that needs to be able to be funded somehow. All of that needs to be able to be paid for. All of that pressure that's in that pipe, the wear and tear that comes from age, needs to be replaced at some point. And for the longest time in this province, we just kind of treated it like, well, we were able to afford it when we first built the fire hydrant. We're going to be able to afford to replace the fire hydrant in the future. And, it's not that just one fire hydrant needs to be replaced. It's, entire neighborhoods, usually developed around the same time. All of that infrastructure aging at the same pace. And you take a look at a fire hydrant. I could have probably spent a little bit more time to get the actual price of a fire hydrant, but say a few $1,000s to do it. Accumulate that across a municipality like Central Saanich, it's a large number. Take it over a much greater region like the capital region. And then, of course, just fire hydrants alone becomes a very large cost on who? I think this is probably one of the reasons why I disagree that we view these development costs, these development financing mechanisms as a tax. It's just the cost of servicing the infrastructure that we're building. Like it has to be captured somewhere. If it's not captured in the development process, if the provincial government, all brands, all types of, all political parties, everyone, all the different brands that have represented in here, nobody in this building wants to extend adequate amount of resources to local governments through increasing their taxation power, shifting some of the taxation that the provincial government collects towards local governments. Maybe, I proposed in my speech on earlier this week, shifting some of the revenue that's generated through the property transfer tax to the Indigenous nations whose land was never surrendered or ceded. I thought, that might be a good way to recognize the fact that since 1875, when that packet of documents got handed over called the Indian land question in this province, still a question, still not answered over vast swaths of land here in the province. Perhaps if the Minister of Finance has an issue with transferring some of that wealth that's generated at the sale of property, at the transfer from one owner to another, there's some wealth that's captured in the process, has a problem transferring that to the First Nations people, maybe they could transfer some of it to the municipal governments, where then that would offset the cost. So maybe it's not a development cost charge, it's a property transfer charge. Call it a tax, call it whatever you want. The reality of it is that infrastructure needs to be paid for somewhere. And if it's not paid for, if there are no fire hydrants, if there are 0 fire hydrants, if there are 0 pipes, if there are 0 fire trucks, then it will be captured in insurance. And the homeowner who's built their nice new home will be paying an astronomical insurance rate to make up for it. And those of us that have been in local government know this is a reality, because, and another conversation that I had when I was in the district of Central Saanich was that our fire hall was too far away from a large number of residents, that they weren't able to meet the 12-minute response time. Volunteer fire department, great value, awesome crew, consistently been an awesome crew of community volunteers in our community for years. Central Saanich Volunteer Fire Department, North Saanich Volunteer Fire Department, Sydney Volunteer Fire Department, all of the outer Gulf Islands and Salt Spring Island, Pender, Maine, Galliano, Saturna, Salt Spring. Think I got them all? I better make sure I've got them all. If not, I'll mention in my next speech. All got great volunteer fire departments, right? If it takes too long for those fire departments to get to that home that's on fire, right, then that homeowner is going to be paying an inflated insurance rate. So the reality is that the system that we're living under, and this was the premise of the speech that I gave earlier this week, the system that we are living under, the economic system that we're living under, is producing these results. The fact that we can come in here, and I can hear debate after debate after debate, in here, pretending like something else is possible under the system that we've got. Just a little tweak here, a little tweak there. You're going to get an entirely different result. It has my mind swirling. I just don't understand how we can come in here, speech after speech after speech, and think that somehow the infrastructure that it needs to support the hundreds of thousands of people that Bill 44 is going to accommodate in this province, that somehow the infrastructure that's going to support those houses, those homes, is going to magically appear. Somehow, all of that infrastructure that hasn't been replaced, that is at the end of its life, is going to magically be suitable for more density. That somehow none of the planning that is done by our local governments, none of the planning that considered this change that we're debating in Bill 44 is going to somehow suddenly be able to accommodate the infrastructure under the ground, is going to be able to accommodate the new density that's going to be put on top of it. Somehow, magically, just out of nowhere, the reservoir in the Sioux Hills is going to be able to produce the amount of water, the volume of water that's needed in order to be able to support the people, so that when the fire trucks do get there in 8 minutes, and they plug that hose into that fire hydrant, and it's working, and the water starts to pump, that it doesn't just run dry at the end. Because the reservoir up at the top of the hill, where's that money coming from? How is that money being generated? Magic. From a lot of what I've heard in these debates, magic. That's how it's going to be. Because you can't capture it here, you can't capture it there. If you capture it over there, you call it a tax, you make it this boogeyman, it becomes this bad thing. But everybody, when their house is on fire, 100% of people in this province want to know that that fire department is going to be there, that when they plug it into that fire hydrant and that hose fills with water and covers that house. Magic isn't going to get water into that hose. What's going to get water into that hose is good planning, a solid fiscal framework that's going to be able to generate enough revenue to be able to keep that infrastructure up to speed, an understandable and a knowable a number of people, and a growth pattern that's going to be sustainable and manageable. That's what the whole idea of regional growth strategies, regional sustainability strategies, it was starting to be called in the Capital Regional District, official community plans, all of those pieces are pieces that are designed in order to ensure that the development that is planned is going to be able to be supported by the infrastructure. Pipes in the ground, asphalt on top of the ground, power lines above ground or underground in some communities. Magic is not going to pay for that. And when the minister tabled Bill 44, there was this ripple through the local elected officials in this province. A ripple, you could hear them. How are we going to pay for 300%, 400%, 600% increase in some neighborhoods? How are we going to pay for the infrastructure in the ground? And so they come out and they say, this is not right. You cannot do this to the zoning and not have a solution for the infrastructure. And the minister runs around, meets with local government people, lets them know it's going to be all right. And then a couple of days, we get Bill 46 on the table. The answer. 21 pages. A surprise to only everybody in BC except for the minister that this bill was hot on its heels. What was the point of that 2-day gap? What was the point of destabilizing this conversation further? Fun? Was it fun for the minister to have to answer to all the mayors going, how are we going to pay for the thing that you've known for decades that we can't pay for? Communities on the Sunshine Coast running out of water. Communities on Western Vancouver Island running out of water. Come to Tofino. Come see the Pacific Rim National Park. Come view the beautiful, rugged west coast of BC. But bring your own water. For decades, we've known that these communities, the community infrastructure has not met the demand already that's on it. The infrastructure that we have in the ground is aging and coming to an end. In 2010, I was a municipal councillor. I walked through this in my bill on Bill 44, my discussion on Bill 44. I was introduced to the primary challenge that local governments face. And that is a provincial government and a federal government that simply have neglected to give them the financing tools that they need in order to be able to maintain the infrastructure that is expected of them. Reports came out. Well-known, experienced mayors and councillors sitting around the table trying to come up in 2010, 2011 with a new fiscal framework. hundreds of local government officials around the table agreeing that what we need is something different than the conditional grant framework. The development cost charges. Municipalities already have a way to be able to generate revenue off of the cost of development, and it was generated from a point in time during the rezoning and subdivision process. But when a huge amount of densification happens with Bill 44, the provincial government recognizes that it needs to create a different point in the process for revenue to be able to be generated. That's why I find it so disappointing that this part of the process, despite what I think about what the government's doing on land that there still is questions over, that they're not answering, that they're not prepared to answer. Stand up and sit down all the time here when it comes to reconciliation. A few times every year we do ministerial statements about reconciliation. Good ideas are given to the ministers to be able to address that, to be able to reconcile the land question in this province. I mentioned that I've seen the map before the lines were drawn on it. Who started drawing the lines? This place started drawing the lines. Who asked? Nobody. So it's disappointing when no matter what you feel about Bill 44, that when a bill comes out, Bill 46, to try to accommodate the increased costs that are going to be associated with densifying neighborhoods that were never planned to have 4 people for every one, it leaves me wondering how it is that we're going to pay for those things. And so Bill 46 is a part of it. It's a part of it, but it's only the future part of it. It doesn't, it's going to replace some infrastructure, for sure, absolutely. But it's going to replace part of the infrastructure that's directly under the houses. As I talked about, there's a whole continuum of infrastructure that is needed in order to maintain everything up to the door. And this bill doesn't fully answer that question. It gives a mechanism, no clue as to whether or not what is going to be generated in this bill is going to be anywhere near what municipalities have. The former BC Liberal government under Gordon Campbell, no interest in providing a new fiscal framework for local governments. Said so much at the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities when I asked him that question back in 2009. Leader of the official opposition at the time, Carol James, asked her the same question. This granting system is broken. The provincial government, making decisions about whether or not a local government has pleaded long enough for the money that's needed in order to fix a sewer pump. I didn't even give the whole picture. What happens when you flush the toilet? What happens in a neighborhood when you flush the toilet and it doesn't go away? Right? It just backs up onto the floor. And we've got sewer pumps, we've got undersized pipes from a past generation underneath all of these houses. And this bill, 46, is supposed to magically solve all those problems. But it won't. Because everybody that's been around this problem in this country, not just this province, but in this country, agrees that the infrastructure deficit in this province, the infrastructure deficit in this country is not 100 million. It's not 200 million. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars that are the result of lost time. They're the result of an assumption that the system that we have is going to magically solve itself. This mechanism isn't good enough. The Building Communities Fund is about 120 years too short if you're going to put $1 billion a year on the table. $51 million announced at the last UBCM to placate local governments that were already feeling the pressure of the infrastructure deficit in this province is a nod in the direction of the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. Anybody who represents a community in this province that has dikes in it knows we are in significant problems in this province. Right? If your communities, if the only infrastructure between your community and the river is a dike that was built in this province, then you know. Then you know. And when spring freshet happens in this province, you're just crossing your fingers. You're just hoping. Because we've got report after report after report. Orphan wells, different issue. Orphan dams, orphan dikes. Nobody wants to take credit for them. Nobody wants to take ownership of them. Nobody wants to take responsibility for them because of the humongous liability that they represent. And this is what we get. This is what we get from this government. We get, don't worry, we're going to get you everything you need in order to put 3, 4, or 6 times more people in those neighborhoods. Merit. Those neighborhoods that were just covered in water, Abbotsford. Don't worry, we're going to get you everything you need to put more people in there. We're going to give you a bill that looks like we're going to give you mechanisms to be able to fund them, except the big projects, the big money projects, not being touched by this. How long did it take in this city, in Victoria, to get a sewage treatment facility? It took years, decades to get a sewage treatment facility. We've got communities in this province that have ancient technology, if you can call it that, for sewer pipes. Water, stormwater and sewer, same pipe. Or same ditch with a cover over it. Right? We just look the other way. We just prefer to pretend like that's not going to be a problem for us. If we're going to force these municipalities, over 5,000 people, to put 3, 4, 6 more people. We might be able to articulate in the media that we're solving one problem, but we are creating a host of other problems. We've faced intense drought in this province for a few years now, right? And probably one of the single biggest investments that all of our communities should be making in this province is increasing their water supply, increasing their ability to capture water. One of the biggest projects that the provincial government should be working on is how it is that they can supplement drinking water, gray water, and black water recovery systems. Communities that I represent on the Southern Gulf Islands have been pleading with this government, please organize this. Please don't make us talk to 5 different ministries to figure out whether or not that this is island health or whether it's, the Ministry of the Ministry of Health. No organization on this. Rainwater capture, you can do it for your own personal houses, but multifamily, can't do it. Right? You think, okay, we're going to be having a situation where we're going to take a single family home, we're going to turn it into a 4-plex or a 3-plex or a 4-plex. We've got a drought. It's been just lingering over top of our province here for the last few years. No answer. I'm just going to end with this. We have a situation that's happening in this House, in this legislative assembly right now, where the housing affordability crisis is being responded to with 5 distinct, separate acts of legislation. At one point in, not this week, but in one point in a week, next week maybe, or the week after next when we come back here, we will have, very likely, 3 different houses, this chamber, the Douglas Fir Room, and the teeny tiny house, as we call it, upstairs, where nobody can go, by the way, the least best place to be debating legislation. No members of the public are welcome there. Right? So we're going to have 3 different houses debating housing legislation at the same time. We're going to have a Stats bill talking about the residential tenancy branch. We're going to have a Stats bill talking about how it is this government can clean up the encampments easier. And we're going to be talking about either Bill 44, Bill 46, or Bill 47. And the rationale that we were given for that is that it's easier for the public to think about 5 things than it is for the public to think about the one thing. Why did this government not put Bill 45, 44, 45, 46, and the 2 Stats bills in the same bill and give British Columbians a comprehensive response to a housing affordability crisis that people need resolved? How did a government think that it would be better for the public, better for the media, better for the legislators to have this fragmented response that is nonsensical? How did they think that that was going to be better for everybody? You know, the only people that benefits are the people on that side of the House. Because there is no way for us to take what's happening in Bill 44, what happened in Bill 45, what's going on in Bill 46, and what's going on in Bill 47, and what's going on in the 2 Stats and Amendments bills, and have a debate about it. Because those debates are fragmented across this House. It makes our job as legislators, it makes the media's job as part of the accountability mechanism of this House, and it takes the job of British Columbians, it makes it that much more difficult. And not just that much more difficult times 5. A real approach to solving a housing affordability crisis would be to put a single document, as large as it would be very large, and the housing policy changes that are being represented in these bills are substantive. And you know what? Some of them are laudable, some of them are questionable, some of them are outright unsupportable. The reality here is that the process that this government has undertaken in order for the people of British Columbia to be able to understand what is happening on housing affordability, what's happening on their property value, what's happening to them as renters, and they've made it impossible. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill. I look forward to the various committee stages of all of the housing bills that we've got in front of us. And I'll take my seat. I'll adjourn debate.
Yeah.